welcome everybody. Very pleased to have you with us for another latest in the Innovators series of video interviews. Today we're very privileged to have with us Dan Reus, who's the founder of Openly Disruptive. And I love the name of that company because we're going to talk all about disruption and innovation. So Dan, I won't steal your thunder. Can you please tell our audience a bit about who you are and your background, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation. I work in disruptive innovation. Openly Disruptive is just a combination of being open and public about what you're doing, and disruptive innovation. Those big innovations rather than the incremental ones. So I help small companies and big companies figure out those visions and figure out who can help them execute those visions and figure out how to get them started on it. I do a lot of work with consumer brands right now and tech companies, but my work actually started in the event industry, and working in corporate events, and before that, even theme parks and things like that, helping bring IP to life and understanding how experiences are monetized. I like to say that like learning how to optimize a haunted house for to make the most money in the month that it can be open during this time of the year. It's in the fall right now. Really helped me understand how do you balance throughput, the scare factor, technology, and the budget to make the most money with a haunted house. So that's a different kind of innovation, but it's similar, and I think it's something that makes me excited about the event industry.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great analogy. Although you won't catch me in too many haunted houses. I'm a bit too scared for some of those. But that's great. You've got a background in the event industry. So when you think about innovation, what do you think that means for the event and venue world?
Yeah, I think great. And I think innovation is just applied creativity. It's creativity applied to generate new value. It's not done just to make us feel better about it. We do it to accomplish a goal. And if you think about it, everybody in the event industry, because we have to create these live experiences and the spaces for them, we're all engaged in innovation. Whether you're a promoter, a show manager, or booking manager that handles the venue, or somebody that handles day of operations, we're all focused on innovation. The user conference that's booked in the ballroom this year has to be better than the one last year on some level, or else people stop coming to the user conference and people stop booking the space. So innovation is a natural part of of the events industry. What I think is more challenging is to think about how to get beyond this incremental innovation that sometimes is leaving value on the table. That I think is more interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think innovation is one of those overly used words, right? And in our industry, in the events industry, I think we're especially coming out of COVID. We had to really change, or during COVID and then coming out of it, had to really change what we were doing and how we were approaching things. So I think that gave us all a bit of a kickstart, and I'd like to hope that is the kickstart we need to continue to innovate, because I think it's fair to say that the event industry has been a little bit guilty of trying to be the same old for a long time. So yeah, let's hope that there is more innovation coming. What do you think are the key drivers of disruption in our industry, and how do you see these trends evolving in the near future?
Let's lead with what you just referred to as the risk. We just came out of a pandemic, and I think it's really interesting. There was a reinsurance company that came up with a way to cover risk for pandemics, and they started trying to sell that policy in 2019 in the event and hospitality and live experience world. And they didn't get a lot of takers because people were like, pandemic, how big, is that really going to happen? How big, could that really have that big an impact on our business? And then we had this whole thing where all of this horrible change happened so rapidly. And then we had this whole shift to Zoom and all of these other kinds of, and then hybrid events. And what I think is really tragic is that the event industry hasn't figured out how they could capitalize on this instead of allowing somebody else to solve their problem. I've always really wondered why, like, for example, uh, you know, people in the event industry didn't figure out how to sell a hybrid rider to go along with your contract with the venue. So if something happens that not everybody can be here, you can pay a small amount of money to have a really solid experience for the people that can't travel here or whatever. But to think about a way to protect their bottom line instead of, giving their bottom line away to the technology companies. I think, so I think really understanding risk, understanding how important live events are, but also how to mitigate that risk so that people feel comfortable, signing those contracts, because ours is an industry that has to, we can't, it's not a day of industry. It's a day of experience, but it has to be planned. And when I've talked to you before, really thinking about how people can benefit, how the events and the properties can benefit from digital transformation. When you look at like what MSG has done with the Sphere in Vegas, and thinking about residencies, and that the building itself can be an asset, and making it be something that people return to over and over again, or ways that people really care whether you went to the Taylor Swift tour, or you just talked about going to the Taylor Swift tour. And the idea that we could somehow figure out a way to make your participation have value, and give you a reputation that you can build on. And then the final one is, for me, the event industry is incredibly labor intensive, and with generative AI able to come up with content that people don't have to be involved in, that robotics to do food service, and all of the technology that could improve the experience. Um, I think the event industry is poised to take advantage of that if it chooses to.
Yeah, look, you've touched on some great topics there. Um, the MSG Sphere. I'm actually going to be in Vegas in a couple of weeks' time. I can't wait to see that building, and just
Yeah,
I mean, that's talk about innovation. That's really taking the experience to another level. And then you mentioned AI. Gosh, you know, you're right. There's so many areas that can help our industry, and some of the more mundane things. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Scared and excited at the same time. But in your experience, Dan, what are some of the common challenges organizations face when they're trying to really foster innovation?
yeah, I appreciate that, because that transcends our industry. These are things that are kind of universal. The biggest one is inertia. We've always done it that way. Or if we're going to do it, we're going to make incremental improvements. And from a technology perspective, we would call that technical debt. But if you look at our venues, I mean, some of our venues, and I think probably a lot of Momentus's clients, are $1 billion versions of technical debt. Once you build a building, you've kind of said, here's how people are going to come and go. Here's how people are going to use the space. And it gets really easy to get locked into, here's how we're going to use this. Here's the kinds of events we want to do, even just to the point of not making it searchable for finding new kinds of things. Like I bet most of the venues out there haven't thought about how they can be attractive to the esports community. And how that could really benefit them, which requires a different thinking about technology and the layout of the space. Um, and that really relates back to thinking about one-time versus lifetime value. So with startups, really think about what's the LTV, what's the lifetime value. It's really easy in the event space, because we do these things based on this contract. Um, that it's like, oh, well, I just have to fulfill this contract, instead of thinking about how I'm not creating lifetime value. So if you think about like what Cirque du Soleil does, they're a brand. They do have shows. They don't own their venues, except the touring ones. But they really think about, how do we make each one of these experiences amazing? So instead of If the first time I went to see Mystere, the Cirque attitude had been, let's see how we can get $100 out of Dan. He's drunk and he's in a casino. They would have made $100. But now they've instead, because it's all about the experience and being true to the brand and having every experience build on that, they've gotten thousands of dollars from me over my life, over my lifetime so far, and a lot of goodwill. And I went to a show last holiday season with my daughter that was a horrible show. But I know the venue made money. I know the ticketing company made money, and I know that the act made money. But they turned me against them because I'll never trust that venue. I'll never trust that what they say in their marketing is what's actually going on in there. And so they took my $100 never to see me again. And I think that's a huge problem in the innovation space, in the events world, is it's way too easy for us to say, well, that's the act's problem, or that's the show organizer's problem, or that's the whoever's problem. And then the last thing, I think it's also a thing about the culture of innovation. And there's like this idea that, well, you must be, this kind of pedigree, and you must do this and you must do that in order to be an innovator. And so people that could really be really transform our industry, the event industry, aren't the right people. It's so that innovation is coming from outside instead of people that really get what moves people. And how do we turn that excitement into value? I think is a real problem. I think that more people in the event industry need to step forward and think differently. Otherwise, it's just going to be Silicon Valley bros figuring out a way to harvest some money out of the event industry, and find some new SaaS fee to,
Yeah,
put on something.
yeah. No, I think you're spot on. You know, I'm heading to a conference next week with Populous. What the architecture firm who are designing some amazing buildings and venues around the world, and they were telling us. I was speaking to them last week, and they were telling us how um, the idea of and the concept of what they're designing is changing now because we have to change the industry, and you can't just build a box and just then sell the space any longer. People are looking for an experience. They're looking for the venue to be part of that experience, like you just said. So we all have to work together. The organizer, the in the case of live entertainment, the act and the venue to create that experience, so we don't turn people off, like the example you mentioned. So no, I think you're great insights there. We can't keep doing what we've always done. Things are different, and
Yeah.
people expect more. Um, Sort of on related to that, but not, I guess. What advice would you give to individuals or organizations that are looking to embrace innovation and navigate disruption effectively? Because we always say we want to innovate, we always say we want to be disruptive, but what advice would you give to people who truly want to do that?
Yeah. I think that's near and dear to my heart. I'm glad you asked that question, Steve, because I think that part of it is that we don't understand the care and feeding of an innovator. So we just like want them to, succeed, make me look good, make us make our numbers, make us, whatever that is, instead of thinking, how do we help innovators innovate? And, I think there's a couple of things here. Number one, innovators get that change happens. So, like the AI thing, there are people that get that AI is coming and that's going to have some impact. Some people have said, well, the stuff I've seen isn't as good as, as the best event we've ever done, so I don't have to worry about that. And the reality is that's just happening because people want that to happen. People are excited about that. The headwinds are far greater than you could ever imagine. So looking at the trends and seeing, pandemics, so things are going to happen again where lots of people said, I want to go back live, but lots of people are like, hey, when it was hybrid, I could go to a lot of events that I couldn't normally go to. And event organizers were like, I could get an audience that I couldn't normally get. So understand how to build on that instead of trying to fight that, and, think about Web3 and some of the things that are going on in there with tokens. And it's not just about, you know, cartoon apes. It's, like I've seen some really interesting things with venue and event organizations using that to actually fund how the, to provide the capital for their operations. And, thinking about that kind of interestingly, and these different models of how, marketplace models, like, think about the secondary market. Instead of complaining about StubHub, think about how the secondary market could benefit you. Think about how some of those tools could benefit, our industry has, because of all of the stakeholders. Think about how difficult it can be to settle an event. Who gets what, how much money came in, where does it all go, and all of that stuff. And thinking about, there are tools out there to make that be much easier, and start thinking about that as a way to build relationships with labor or municipalities or all of the other stakeholders, instead of trying to keep them at arm's length. I think that's huge, thinking about decentralized finance. And then just understand the job to be done. There's a phrase, in innovation, that there's the job to be done framework. And there's a great video actually of two women in the aisle of, in the cooking utensil aisle of a store. And they're both looking at skillets. And one of them is looking at a skillet and doing this, like, how will this flip eggs? And the other one has got the skillet and she's like, how will this hit my husband?
Yeah.
And understanding what the job to be done of an event is huge. But, if you think, this goes back a few years, but back when I was more actively doing corporate events, you had people that were concessionaires who were like, my job is to provide food that comes out of boxes that we, microwave or fry. And people will pay exorbitant prices, and we'll give a cut to the building and everybody will be happy. Well, nobody was really happy. And then you had a company like Let Us Entertain You that came around and said, well, wait a minute, what if we look at it like food is actually part of how we engage our audience? And I think that's a really key thing. So if we can accept that change happens, really understand that it takes time to move through and that we have to be patient with it, and really understand the job to be done, I think we can do some phenomenal things in the event space.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And, the message that I got from that is embrace the change, and don't oppose it. And look, we're an industry that has potential to be disrupted if we don't embrace it. We don't want to be the taxi industry, the next taxi industry. And look what happened when they did not embrace the idea of rideshare and so on, and it got disrupted. We don't want to be that industry that gets that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So great insights there. Thanks, Dan. And look, finally, can you share an example for the viewers of a recent innovation that impressed you, and what made that stand out to you?
Yeah. So I've seen two. I mentioned esports earlier, and that relates directly back to the event industry, because I have a friend that works on the technology side of events, and so they've been figuring out, how do you create this virtual world where everybody in the building, thousands of people in the building, and millions of people around the world are all in this synchronous world where there's no delay in everything. And to think about our live events as being nodes of a much bigger experience, I think is really huge. And you see that with some of these huge esports leagues that are coming up in the communities around that. But I want to talk about one that's outside the event industry, and that's Barbie, the Barbie movie. And now I'm not the target consumer for Barbie. In fact, I haven't actually seen the movie. It's one of those things I want to see. My daughter is away at college. I want to see it with her because I want to get her reaction to it. But I mean, if you think about it, so the doll premiered in the late 50s. It's a plastic thing, like it had become synonymous with phony. But you had all of these consumers that had a relationship with Barbie. And then when you look at what Mattel and I think Warner Brothers was the studio, and Greta Gerwig, the director, and how they took that phenomena and found a way to make it relevant. And if you saw, I mean, that was made over $1 billion at the box office, but it generated all of these experiences. Like if you went to see any other movie, you saw all these people showing up in costume and people showing up in groups, and like it became an experience and a movement that I think probably really rejuvenated that brand, and really capitalized on what it's like to have an experience and a relationship with a piece of IP that has way more value. And I think that's the future. People want authenticity, and they even want to create authenticity from things where there wasn't a tremendous amount of it before. It was seen as, it's a doll, it's phony, it's she's got impossible dimensions, all of that stuff. But now it became this feminist icon, and I think that is really innovative thinking, and really understanding the audience, you know, how you relate to the audience and how you can improve how you relate to the audience. So kudos to them. I wish I was part of that.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. That's a great example. And look, Dan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. You've got some incredible insights, and the event industry needs more people like you that that think this way. So I hope the viewers got as much out of this as I did, and look forward to engaging with you more in the future. So thanks again for joining us.